Good morning. My name is Michael Mack, and I'm a cardiac surgeon at the Baylor Healthcare System, the Heart Hospital of Baylor, Plano in Dallas, Texas. It's my pleasure to moderate a roundtable this morning. We're here in Orlando, Florida at the Society of Thoracic Surgeons 50th Annual Meeting. We're going to discuss a very exciting project in the field of outcomes research and device surveillance, the STS ACC TVT Registry of transcatheter valves. We have a very distinguished panel here this morning to discuss this, who are all experts in the field and intimately involved with the database, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. To my right, Dr. Carroll.
Yes. Mike, my name's John Carroll. I'm an interventional cardiologist at the University of Colorado in Aurora, Colorado, and I'm happy to be here and part of this panel.
David.
I'm David Holmes, an interventional cardiologist from Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I have worked with Michael from the beginning of this in terms of the TVT Registry. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, welcome, David. Vinod.
I'm Vinod Thourani. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm honored to be here on this distinguished faculty.
Well, welcome. So, David, let me start with you. Perhaps you could give our viewers a little bit of background on the TVT Registry, what it is, and how it started.
Sure, Michael. It's great to talk about this journey, and that is indeed what it has been, as you know. It turned out that this came as the brainchild of concerns from the FDA. So Bram Zuckerman brought Michael and I together, brought ACC and STS together, and said, we have a transformational technology that's coming along. It's been used in 30 or 40,000 patients worldwide. We don't have it here yet. The FDA and the regulatory agencies are concerned what is going to happen when it indeed is approved, because it was apparent it was going to be approved. And so then there was concern as to how you would disperse this technology, who would have it, how would it be done, by whom would it be done, and how would the patients be followed. And that then was the genesis of what then became the TVT Registry. That initial meeting between STS with Michael Mack, ACC, and Bram Zuckerman. And out of that has formed this incredible group of partnerships that included the regulatory agencies, that included NIH, that included patient advocacy, that included data quality people, that included NCDR as well as ACC, and has been an amazingly successful partnership joined at the hip with industry, now different industry partners as we move forward with that. It was initially very, very broadly based to indeed identify which patients were going to get it, with the hope that we would then be able to capture every single patient as part of post-market approval processes. One of the concerns in the past, as you know, has been following approval. Some of the time, industry then would perform studies where they looked at a small fraction of the patients. So we knew what a denominator was, but we had no clue what a denominator was. And so the intent of this was then to follow all patients in a scientifically rigorous fashion, and we have done that.
So, John, this was a new collaboration of multiple stakeholders that had never worked together before, and we're almost 3 years into the process now, and you've been very engaged in the trenches with all the building the infrastructure for this. Perhaps you could describe the last 3 years of relationship building and networking and weekly conference calls that happen between all the stakeholders, and what have been the obstacles and what have been the successes?
This is a key issue of where we come from and where we're going. I think what we immediately identified is we are on a mission. This is healthcare reform. This is all about how do we improve patient care by prospectively, from the first day of approval of a new technology, a new therapy, to gather that data. And that we're all stakeholders, both the different professional groups, but CMS, industry, NIH, FDA, in trying to understand this new technology, and most importantly, developing a common infrastructure that is a learning healthcare system, in that from real patient care experiences, prospectively and comprehensively, we get an idea of what this therapy is like, what kind of patients benefit, what kind of patients perhaps benefit more from alternatives, what sort of patients really where the therapy is not going to help at all. And the collaboration, therefore, becomes natural between the different professional societies, because we're really talking about patient management in a broad sense. We're really talking about a unique procedure in that, at least at this point, it's a very combined procedure between CV surgeons, interventional cardiologists, and all the ancillary people who are key in allowing this to become a safe and effective treatment. And I think going forward, what has really dissolved is the barriers between the professions. We really see as the challenges more of how do we effectively use this data to both expand indications, to come up with new risk models of who's going to benefit, who is not going to benefit, and to understand the fundamental disease process of aortic stenosis and how do we modify it. And we're now moving on to other areas with mitral valve repair, with transcatheter approaches, and I think we're going to have many more successes. So I think the challenges are really not turf war challenges. There are more of these common issues of improving our system of healthcare and individual patient-based decision-making.
Michael, maybe I could just make one quick comment before Vinod talks. While in retrospect, it looks like it was an obvious sort of thing. On Monday morning, this Monday morning, it looks like it was going to be a winner from the beginning. On Friday, before it started, there were a lot of doubts about it. So the professional societies each sort of said, you want me to do what? You want to do IDEs? You want to look at all patients in the country having this? Boy, there was incredible angst in the professional societies. And so a lot is riding on that, continues to ride on that, both from the regulatory agencies who said, gosh, we're not sure you can do that, from the professional societies who said, we're not sure that we want to do that.
And the reimbursement.
And the reimbursement.
And the reimbursement.
So there's lots of stuff that turns out in retrospect looks like it's the ideal thing, and it indeed is. But early on, people said, not so much.
So Vinod, maybe you could comment for a minute how the reimbursement aspect of this works.
So as David and John and Mike have already talked about, the reimbursement aspect is tied very intimately to this. So if you are not part of the TVT Registry, and this is really the brainchild of the two of you, then it's difficult to get reimbursed. You just can't. And so it becomes incumbent on us as providers to put all of our patients into this because you have to. Unlike the European databases where that's not necessarily the case. And so we really will be able to capture the entire country's new technology implants from what John mentioned, not only the aortic valve, but also the upcoming mitral valve trials, or mitral valve commercially available devices. So this is the first time really in the world that we're, I think, finally doing it right.
Well, I think David would agree. He and I will take neither the credit nor the blame for that. So, David, this whole risk that you've talked about and all the work that John's talked about has finally borne some fruit, and we've seen the first results of what's going on in TAVR in the United States that was published in November. Could you kind of share with the viewers what some of those results were? And then we've heard more results today, and we'll ask Vinod next to comment on that.
One of the things going forward in any initiative like this is to define metrics for success. Lots of different ways that you could define it. In this particular case, one of the most important metrics for success is the science that comes out of it, the truly valid scientific data that comes out of this. And so early on, the very first data that came out was a publication by you in JAMA this last fall that looked at about 7,700 patients to look at the outcome in this very broad group of patients nationwide to see what was happening, what the results were there issues with it. And that really has formed the first layer of metrics where we have scientific data It's been adjudicated. It's been very well done. Everybody is comfortable with the data analytics, and that then is the foundation upon which Matt Brennan's talk that Vino is going to talk about, that all of the things that are going to be talked about in the combined STS ACC symposium this afternoon, that the people will talk about in terms of valve, in terms of bicuspid valve, in terms of end-stage renal disease, and then the subsequent meetings that are going to be full of data from the TVT Registry, where we're able to look at the science of the field of TVT.
So Vino, perhaps you could comment.
Right.
We learned so far is TAVR been safe in the United States? And we heard a presentation this morning about comparison surgical AVR and TAVR. What have we learned?
So Matt Brennan today at the 50th annual STS meeting presented, really I think publicly, the first time that a peer-reviewed abstract has been presented in addition to Mike's paper that was published in JAMA last year. And it's quite interesting. This is the first time that what we've been able to do in math through DCRI, was able to actually merge the STS database, the TVT database, and really link everything together for short-term outcomes, not long-term outcomes. And what really we're finding is quite interesting. And he was able to show that actually surgical volume, I think one of the biggest impactful things for our constituents is that surgical volume actually increases in centers that have transcatheter valve, where there's a very slight increase in those that don't have a transcatheter valve program. But overall, I think what we're heading towards are valve centers. And in valve centers, when you have all technology available to you, you're able to really increase the amount of patients and give them a variety of options. That leads to increased volume. You know, the outcomes of transcatheter valve short term, I think it's interesting that the results maybe they're going to change a little bit in our initial process as we're kind of going between what patients should have surgical valve, especially in the high-risk patient population compared to the low-risk. It'll be interesting to see what happens not only in the long term, in the midterm analysis for this. I think it's a little early to see how transcatheter valve is doing, especially with the learning curve. The results are good. They're similar to the partner results in all practical purposes, but it'll be interesting for midterm and long-term results.
John, anything to add from what you heard this morning?
I think one of the major developments is that, number one, more patients are being treated, meaning there's greater awareness of the disease, and I certainly expect that's going to be even a bigger issue when we come to mitral regurgitation, where there are a lot of patients out there who are suffering, who are being undertreated, and whether they need surgery or a transcatheter is going to be decided by the teams. Secondly, we're not looking at just mortality, of whether one's alive, but we're looking at, I think, the important issues of patient-reported outcomes using the KCCQ questionnaire, using walk tests, using other novel assessments of both baseline status, how frail people are and how disabled they are, but what are they doing a year or two down the road? That's a critical question. It's not only about being alive, it's about being better. And especially since you're dealing with a group of people who are often loaded with comorbidities, the issue is, will they really feel better? Or will their lung disease or will their orthopedic problems really continue to hobble them? And that's where I think we're already starting to see that this new technology added to patients also having the surgical option really makes an impact in these long-term healthcare status issues that are vital for these patients.
Well, you know, we still have a 20 to 30% mortality at 1 year in all the registries and everything we've looked at. And hopefully with the TVT registry, with the thousands of patients, we'll be able to get that mortality down by figuring out what patients really not to do anything to. And I think that's really the goal from TVT registry with almost 8 or 9 or 10,000 patients. I'm hoping that's what we can find out, is who not to operate on.
Good.
Or alternatively, identify patients because you have increased the awareness of earlier treatment.
That's right.
If we see patients that then are before becoming end stage, we recognize them because there is heightened awareness of the issue, then potentially we will avoid the problem that patients go too long without treatment, whether that be surgical aortic valve replacement or whether it be transcatheter aortic valve replacement.
You know, going along with this is in the randomized trials, there are a host of patient populations we were unable to see the outcomes for. And Mike has been very interested in, for instance, dialysis patients. We never randomized in any of the trials, and the TVT registry, I think, will allow us to evaluate some things that we haven't been able to do in randomized trials. So I think that's very exciting for the registry.
So, David, both you and Vinod have mentioned some upcoming data that we're going to learn. Could you perhaps highlight what we're going to hear this afternoon at the STS meeting and what we're going to hear at the American College of Cardiology in March?
Well, we're going to hear this afternoon, I can start this off and then Vino can add on to that. We're going to hear information on the history of this, number one. Number two, we're going to hear information on the metrics by which TVT is going to be measured, the metrics that we talked a little bit about. We're going to talk about baseline demographics, and John is going to do that. We're going to hear about valve-in-valve. We're going to hear some information on bicuspid disease. And so it's a terribly exciting time. At ACC, we're going to at least hear about valve-in-valve, bicuspid disease, end-stage renal disease, and potentially, 1-year outcome of a merged CMS TVT data set for the very first time.
That's very exciting stuff. We're also going to talk, I think the TVT will have the largest alternative non-transfemoral platform or routes that we're going to look at. So it's going to be very nice for us to look at transapical and transaortic outcomes in high-risk and inoperative patients. And the TVT registry does differentiate between high-risk and inoperative. And so we'll be able to, for the first time again, with thousands of patients, give our constituents thousands of patients in each category with good statistical prowess, I think.
And that's key for the local physicians, surgeons, cardiologists taking care of these patients who have these programs, is to be able to do some benchmarking to understand how are we doing versus other centers. Are we selecting the same patients? Are we getting different outcomes? Are we choosing alternative accesses in different ways? And that's an additional powerful thing about this database that we haven't emphasized, is that it really is, the first basic use of it is about quality improvement on the local level, feedback.
So to follow up on that theme, John, the closing slide this morning said that one of the future directions is to determine whether the number of TAVR centers should expand in the United States based upon this data. How are we going to go about doing that?
We're glad he asked you
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
Yeah.
Let's get on that side of the table.
It's going to be a challenge. I think we all kind of step back and say the last thing we want to do is restrict technology that's both sustains life but also improves the quality of life. On the other hand, we scientifically and we have a professional and ethical obligation to say what makes a good center, what makes a center that doesn't perform as well. Can we differentiate it? Is it a learning curve issue? Is it a volume issue? These are complex issues, and I don't think anyone wants to be flippant about who should do what based on anything but rigorously analyzed, scientifically, credibly, and publicly discussed data and the methodology that's used in this.
I think that what we heard from CMS way back at the beginning was that this was an issue, a balance about delivery of life-saving care to people in the population of the United States, and that they have access to care, but it's safe and effective treatment. And they said on the front end, not everybody's going to be able to do this, and so we agreed on a starting point, and we would look at the results in the high-volume centers versus the low-volume centers. Yep. And if they're equal, then Medicare said we'll look at expanding it. So I think we're at that stage of being able to, for the first time, have real honest-to-goodness data that we can look at that and see.
Along those lines, Michael, and this would be terribly important for the audience, as of today, whatever this date in Monday at the 50th anniversary of STS, we need to realize there are 251 centers in the United States that are performing this, and that there are 12,715 patient records that are available. So for the very first time, then, there has been a request for proposals that comes out from the Research and Publications Committee of TAVR that invites proposals for research questions to surgeons, to regulatory agencies, to interventional cardiologists, and takes those proposals on a rolling basis that will allow us to answer or at least address questions like the learning curve, how many centers, who's going to do it, how should it be done, and what the setting is in which it can be done. And so for a very first time, and the audience needs to realize this is an incredible opportunity for each of you to be involved. There is a website that is listed in terms of sending in a proposal. It's a 2-page proposal, and John can comment on this because it goes then to Denver. It's a 2-page proposal that you can then query and at least get in the list of people for asking important scientific questions. John, do you want to comment further on that? It's a great thing.
Sure. I think one of the purposes of such a collaborative effort is to have access in this way for outside people to put in proposals. Secondly, the scientific credibility of these proposals is key. Thirdly, there is a lot of work that goes into the analysis of the data for these proposals and how we fund this, to what extent can it be funded internally versus people who get grants on the outside from various parties bringing that in to pay for the cost of analysis. So I think these are the issues that will be worked out. But I think the fundamental reality is that we have a huge amount of, I think, high quality and increasingly adjudicated data that we need to ask the important questions and get them answered through this. And that it's not only the TVT Registry, but as Matt Brennan showed today, it's linking to other databases like the STS and to CMS. So we've got a lot of opportunities and work to do.
So, David, this TVT registry was one of the pillars of the FDA's new initiative for post-market device surveillance in the United States. Do you think we have seen enough yet to know whether the TVT registry will become the de facto method on registries in general that our professional society run? Is this what we're going to see going forward as post-market device surveillance in the United States that has been very appropriately criticized until now?
I think it's a great question. The answer to that depends upon our continued success in having high-quality data that then is analyzed appropriately, that is published, that becomes available to the public in terms of some of the self-reporting things that STS has done so well with, that looks at addressing these issues. At the present time, it's incredibly promising. FDA is incredibly pleased with how things have continued to play out. Obviously, on each side, whether it be the regulatory agencies or the professional societies, you always want it to be quicker, more responsive. And we're working through those things. But as the relationship gets closer, I think the answer will also be more clear, as John talked about, on a Monday morning, that obviously this is how it should be done. It should be done in the field of cardiovascular disease. It's been done to a certain extent in the field of orthopedic procedures. I think this is the poster child for what can be done. We just need to make sure that it continues to be done very well, that we don't say, well, we've answered all the questions, we don't need to do this anymore. Because in the past, professional societies have sometimes said, well, we've answered everything, we don't need to do any more of that. And so we need to constantly be incredibly eager and hungry for more data, for expansion in a very controlled way so that there is rational dispersion, not just of transformational technology, but rational dispersion of transformational methodology and systems of care like TVT.
So our time is almost up, but I would like to ask a last question of each of the three of you, and that is keyed off of what David's comments are. We have an incredible national resource now of abundant data and information. What is the biggest first lingering question that you have that you would want to query the TVT database about? And whichever one of you is ready can go first.
I think the biggest
That'll be David.
question that society needs to face and we need to help, and this touches on what Vinod had talked about and John has talked about, is that we need to identify some risk stratification models in terms of stroke, in terms of mortality, in terms of other things, so we can help the physicians as well as help the patients make some very good decisions about their care going forward. And so I think the risk stratification models are incredibly important to select the right patients at the right time for the right procedure.
So piggybacking a little bit on that, I agree with David. I really think that right now we're using the STS predicted risk of mortality. We really, all of the studies have shown an OD ratio of 0.3, 0.4 for TAVR patients under the STS prom almost. We need to really have another formula so that I can sit in the office and say, this is your risk for SAVR, this is your risk for TAVR, and really now, which one should we go at? Go for you, looking at stroke, PV leak, and mortality.
Agree,
So to me, that's
agree
number one.
totally, but that was David. You don't get credit for that. John? What?
Boy, there are a lot of questions. I think one that I want to see more data on that will help individual patients and clinicians answer the question is, what is the heterogeneity of the treatment effect in terms of benefit, and also the heterogeneity of the risk? Because we know some patients just do fantastically, and as Vinod mentioned, some patients do not, and there is a sizable mortality. So if we can do a better job of selecting in whom they really prosper after this procedure versus having bad outcomes, that's a huge forward step. And it also gets to the core of, this is expensive technology, hybrid ORs, all the different things that go into this. And we're at a time where, face it, we are spending more than we make in terms of healthcare system. And so we have to pay attention to making sure that the dollars we spend on these new technologies that are wonderful go toward giving it to making sure the patients are going to benefit, and sorting out in whom they don't, and it's futile. And that's a key cost issue I think we can help with, and not alone in isolation, but we can contribute some real data.
So maybe succinctly, it's frailty in some ways.
Yeah.
Frailty is a big part of it, Mike. So if you ask for a directed question towards it, maybe we decide on what's frail and what at 1 year that frail person should or should not have had something. So maybe the KCQ, and we also looked at the 5 meter. So maybe those are the type pointed questions that we can deal with immediately that will give us a quick answer.
Well, great. Well, I'd like to thank the three of you for an extremely robust, informative, and stimulating discussion here. And we hope that the viewers have found this as interesting as I have. And congratulations to the Society of Thoracic Surgeons for a great 50th anniversary. Thank you.